Today we're going to be talking about the geography of Indiana. A geographer looks at the spatial and the locational aspects of everything, kind of the stage for all events. We also take a look at the sense of place. Indiana sets up pretty well for that, being in the middle of the country. It's about 1,900 miles up to Canada and about the same over to the West Coast. And we're just kind of like in the middle. Day and a half drive to the Gulf of Mexico and maybe a good long day over to the East Coast. And being central is really important from a geopolitical standpoint. We have actually some real benefits by being central to the country, such as being a transportation hub. Indianapolis, sometimes called the crossroads of America, it really is the crossroads of America, because if you look at the interstate highways, about just spokes go in different directions, and almost every direction is covered. It also puts us way too dependent on the automobile and everything related to that. The sense of place in Indiana is really a lot nicer and more intriguing than people realize. Big monastic churches like at St. Meinrad's in southern Indiana and Ferdinand, just tremendous basilicas, giant buildings. And then the natural landscape, the human habitat, that's important to the geographer as well. Looking out over the majestic Ohio River as it bends, the good old Overlook restaurant, it's got a good overlook about 200 or 300 feet above that beautiful river. And the Brown County vistas, too. I just love to go to Brown County, have a picnic, and look out over really almost literally a million trees. Treetops for everywhere. Everywhere a squirrel wants to jump and go from place to place. That's a kind of a sense of place that we have here in Indiana. And Lordy day, the cornfields, they just go on forever as the northern part of the state, the soybean fields, and my gosh, a popcorn field there. We're known for our popcorn. And see a few barns, a few great big agricultural facilities for value-added agriculture, they call it. Hogs and calf-cow buildings and poultry, lots of poultry. And in the southern part of the state, they have a lot of vineyards and making that good old wine that southern Indiana can only make. Used to be a fruit area. Fruit diseases are a little bit of a problem, so is it early frost. But the wineries, they do pretty well. I think that the tourists, they kind of like to line up for a smooth drink of that Indiana wine. The state of Indiana is an unusual looking state, but it's really formed and shaped by the rivers. You say, well, wait a minute. I know the Ohio River is along the southern boundary between good old Indiana and Kentucky. However, the Wabash River is also part of the boundary, and right there where the Wabash enters the state of Illinois, and we cut that river right in half. And Illinois gets half of that part, and we get half. And you take a point right there in the river and go straight north to Lake Michigan. Now, a long time ago, about the time that Indiana got statehood in 1816, the river itself was a starting point, and they went straight north for the Illinois boundary. And Michigan had too much property. So at the time of statehood, gave good old Indiana another 10 miles in order to capture that lake shore. And that was important to the state because now we've got a harbor up there, and we've even got a national park. How about that? The other side of the state, the eastern side, the line goes straight right down there along a line of longitude until it reaches the Miami River, where it goes into the Ohio. And right there at that point is where the edge of Indiana starts and goes on down the Ohio River and Kentucky on one side and fighting for more land, although it's all wet between Indiana and Kentucky. How about that? Now, the good old rivers of Indiana, they mostly flow down toward the southwest, which has got to be the lower part of the state. And it is, except for the Maumee River up there in good old northeastern Indiana, where it flows over into the Ohio, the state of Ohio, and then on over to Lake Erie. How about that? It's a little bit of a dent over there, and it's flowing the right way. We have the Blue River, too, that goes straight south into the Ohio, Wabash, and its watershed. Wabash is well known, in Indiana culture. And the strange thing about the Wabash is a great deal of that was French. And the French settled along the Wabash, particularly around Vincennes, and they chopped up all good old Indiana into French long lots. And each property holder, would have several acres deep and just a small amount on the front. Now, much of the rest of the state is really kind of checkerboard, not that French long lot that we find there at Vincennes. The White River, too, comes down through Indianapolis. I used to think that it could be navigated. Well, it's not kind of hard to navigate across rocks, so it didn't work too well. Those are the watersheds that are so important to life here in good old Indiana. And we can kind of tell by the lower part of the state being the lower part of the state, and that's where the rivers go. The Great Ice Ages, they scraped this state totally clean, left a lot of glacial till, which mixed into wonderful soils that are very deep, several hundred feet deep actually, of glacial debris. And that continues down. There's kind of a loop there, and the Norman Uplands runs through Brown County right in the middle, and we can see where it stopped there at the Bean Blossom Overlook. Pine Bluff is just the same way. And below the Bean Blossom Overlook and the Pine Bluff, we find a lot of Canadian material, and that includes some gold flakes. I even found a diamond over there near Gatesville. And it's always a place to find arrowheads, and it's a wonderful place to be right there along the edge of where the Wisconsin ice sheet stopped. We had two major ice sheets, the Illinois ice sheet and Wisconsin, and about a half-mile thick of ice, my goodness. And they didn't melt back 15, 20,000 years ago. It was when we still had some ice. And northern Indiana got the benefit of lots of water to form Kettle Pond lakes. All the natural lakes in the state are in the northern part of the state, and certainly not in the Norman Upland there by good old Brown County. In fact, Brown County's got more ponds than any county in the whole state, but they needed it for a water supply. They had no way to get water otherwise. And of course, they get water and they get bluegills too. They get both. The ice ages made a big difference to the topography of the state. And we find the areas that were just a little bit glaciated, like the Mitchell Plain over near Bloomington and to the southwest of Bloomington. It's just full of karst topography where the till is not very heavy, and you can get down to where the caves are underneath the ground. The caves, I've been in quite a few of them, are really gorgeous, with what we call dripstone deposits. I used to like to look at the cave life that would be white crawfish and white little fish too. I even saw a bullfrog once in the entrance to the cave. It was the size of a football. Just about scared me to death. And one time I was in a cave, and I love going spelunking with my students, but we did kind of a nutty thing. We went into Blue Springs Cave down by Bedford, and we crawled around, and we went 8 miles. That took forever. And then we crawled back and slid back and walked back and got wet and got muddy. And 20 hours later, we came out of that cave. How about that? And the karst topography even has lost rivers. Sometimes those lost rivers, when it rains real hard, it comes up from below and floods everything just like a overflowed river. Now down near French Lick, sometimes it gets like a great big lake down there, and it's coming up from below, and they all good old lost rivers. You know, Indiana's economy is based on farming, and value-added farming is something that's real important these days. Not just the poultry operation, the egg operations, turkey farms, confinement farming. That's real important for the economy. But the farming that we see today sometimes includes even windmill farms in order to get power. And they lease out part of their farm and make quite a bit of money. These great big towers, and they spin around, particularly in northern Indiana where the wind is higher. Aquaculture is happening also throughout the state. We have fish farms of tilapia and even ponds, which are sometimes also called shrimp. And we find those. And goldfish farming is important around Bedford. We see some really interesting use of farmland today in order to make a living. And most of the people have moved off the farm and into the small towns. And Lordy day, every small town seems to be about a half an hour away from another small town. And that allows for the granaries to be in these different small towns. And you used to be able to get there back 100 years ago. And then take your grain and then come back home that night and have supper. Now, really, the grain has given us a pattern of little small towns everywhere, and they're pretty nice. They're not as boarded up as some of the ones in Illinois. I don't know why. Illinois, I think, gave up and had bigger farms and richer people or something like that. But we enjoy those little towns a great deal. If we see a huge lake, it's probably for flood control. We have the Patoka Reservoir and Monroe Lake, the biggest lake in the state, and it's supposed to be used for flood control to hold the water back from the mighty Ohio during the springtime when we could get some devastating floods otherwise. And it's become recreational and good for fishing and even water supply. There's lines going from Lake Monroe up to Bloomington and over to Nashville give us the water supply that we so desperately need. So the great big lakes could be from impounding creeks, like Salt Creek is impounded to create Lake Monroe. There are not too many natural hazards in good old Indiana, but the New Madrid Fault is down south of the tip of Illinois, and it could cause some damage up in this area too, but probably just damage, and hopefully nobody would succumb to that tremendous earthquake potential down south of Illinois and New Madrid. Memphis would have problems. It's a little bit closer, and the buildings are not built quite so well, and that's something to be concerned about. Hazards, too, could be a blizzard. We don't get too many blizzards, but we usually get a good whippersnapper at least once a year or twice. And it's from the polar vortex. Oh, my goodness, what is that? It comes right down on the jet stream, and the jet stream is 6 miles high in the sky. And it loops and goes back and forth. And when it loops way south, it doesn't act as a block anymore. And we get polar weather, and right ahead of the polar weather can be a gigantic snowstorm. Sometimes we get pretty heavy snowstorms along the state northern line, right there from the open water of the Great Lakes. And the lake effect snow is something that we often get. But snow average is about 24 inches deep a year, and sometimes it's a little bit less, and then some times we even get walloped. One time I got walloped by a 32-inch snowstorm, and it broke all the bushes, and my landlord wanted me to pay for them. And I said, well, you got to send that bill up to heaven, because I ain't going to pay for that. And we don't have too many blizzards in a given year, and the tornadoes are something we have to be a little concerned about. We've had some really strong ones that seems to hug the river valleys, open fields, and we got 22 to 24 tornadoes a year in this state. And we sure do hope that they stay more aloft, or they're smaller, but they can ride, for many miles, a mile wide and multiple miles long, and do quite a bit of damage. Some cities like Petersburg, Indiana, over near Illinois, you go through that little city and a little town, and you don't see any old trees. You say, well, why don't they have old trees here? Well, they all went with a tornado that happened a few decades before. And they went up airborne, so they ain't here no more, as they would say in Indiana. The best 2 seasons of the year, they say that actually September is the best month of the year for weather in Hoosier land and Indiana. But the falls are often very nice and kind of dry. The springs are also very pleasant, kind of wet. People don't really like winter that much in Indiana. They don't have enough snowmobiles, I don't think. Summer can get pretty hot with the high humidity, and it gets pretty dry in August. I used to remember how dry it got in August because when I played tournament golf, the golf courses would get real hard, and you could hit a shot and it just would bounce forever. It's like bouncing it off of concrete. So that was pretty cool. The average wind speed is 10 miles per hour. Of course, as you get higher above the ground, it will pick up a little bit. Wouldn't be as much blockage from trees and other things like that. It's not quite like the prairie in Illinois where the wind seems like it never stops. But 10 miles an hour is not really that great for wind power, but it's close enough, particularly in the northern part of the state. And the average temperature is 54 degrees. We kind of understand that because that's the temperature deep underground in the caves. If the cave is like 40 or 50 feet, 80 feet underground, it's going to be closer to 54 degrees year round. And that's the average temperature of the state. The rainfall amount is around 42 inches, a little bit wetter in the southern part of the state, and a little drier in the northern part. You say, well, why is that? And the source is the Gulf of Mexico. If the Gulf of Mexico wasn't there, we'd be more like Utah and Arizona. And that's where we get our humidity. That humidity comes up with a warm front, and it's spinning counterclockwise. The cold air comes down behind it as it spins counterclockwise, and right in the center is a great big L, which means a low front, and a low right at the edge of that front. This is where the storms really get heavy because the cold air pushes wind straight aloft, and that creates the cumulonimbus clouds and the real dark storm clouds that are so obvious to us. Some people ask me, why do clouds get dark even on nice days? Well, it's the density that causes clouds to get dark. So how about that? You've just found out something else. A lot of people ask me about climate change. Kind of controversial, but it's probably changed about 1 degree Fahrenheit in the state of Indiana, and people say we're moving a little bit more toward Kentucky-type temperatures. And those that hate winter probably like our lighter winters. What the heck? A big map saying the hazards of climate change, right or wrong, seem to indicate that we might be in for more migrant animals coming up from the south, or snakes or whatever. Maybe also some infectious diseases. So that's maybe our penalty for putting too much pollution into the air. And we have coal-fired power plants in the state of Indiana, and we still love that coal. And it creates, with the new filters, creates real small particles and helps to increase the carbon dioxide. And they tell us that that doesn't help our climate at all. The human impacts on our wonderful state have been enormous. About 60% of the first growth forest has been cut over. We've had a lot of our wetlands drained and tiled, be used as agriculture. Streams are not nearly as clear as they used to be, and they're polluted from industrial waste. And we've got a real problem with changing the habitat, the natural habitat, wildlife, and losing habitat and so forth. And this is of great concern, and we got something to work on that one. The population of this state is 6.9 million people, and it's growing very, very slow, about 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 a year at the most. And some of that is immigration, and Hispanics, for example, have increased their percentage in the state. Let's talk about that for a second. The population is about 87% white. Some counties are almost entirely white. They had 28 counties that were called sundown counties, where a person that wasn't Caucasian couldn't stay overnight. And that happened until about World War II. So that is part of the reason for the difference in ethnicity throughout the state. We have more Afro-Americans in the big cities like Indianapolis and Gary. The Hispanics, where we have a lot of packing plants and food distribution. We have really the Asian population in university towns and in high-tech areas like Columbus, Indiana. So the ethnicity is in pockets throughout the state, but the state is right up there in the top 20 in terms of the percentage of white population. The population of Indiana puts us well ahead of Kentucky, but way behind on Illinois and Ohio. Those two states have almost twice as many people as we do. We are the 38th most populous state in the country, and that's probably just fine for a lot of us. The cost of living in Indiana is a little bit less. The politics are very conservative, and the economics are conservative. We actually have a government surplus. How about that? We have a kind of a farmer attitude of self-reliance and taking care of ourselves instead of having the government take care of us. And that's omnipresent everywhere. The state was really settled from the south up to the north, and when Indiana got statehood in 1816, over 70% lived in the southern part of the state. A lot of German and Irish population. And we see evidence of that, like Evansville used to have a German newspaper, and we have a lot of German festivities in Jasper, Indiana. We have a great big Oktoberfest, and even Indianapolis will have a really German section of the city. The northern part of the state, it actually attracted people from Central Europe and Eastern Europe, and that changed the population of the dynamic of the Caucasian group in the state of Indiana. The economy of the state is run really by Indianapolis. It's a hub for everything. Lots of big warehousing like FedEx and Amazon is there, and they send products all over the country. Indiana, you'd think, would be known for its food supply, but the human food supply is actually imported. Illinois is only 5 or 6% naturally raised, and Indiana is only about 20% raised here in the state. So we get a lot of food imports and a lot of warehousing. Indiana is known for other industries such as pharmaceutical, medical technology, the universities. We've got first-rate business schools. We've got a lot of distribution centers of car parts and actually the building of automobiles and repair of engines and taking used parts and like Jasper engines in Jasper, Indiana, and taking old engines and making them totally retrofitted for the new vehicle. Electric vehicles are getting a good start in this state as well. So the economy is perking along, and for activities in the state, we find Indiana is a sports state. We've got lots of tennis courts, golf courses, you name it, everything you can think of. And our football and basketball is near and dear to our heart. We've got professional teams, and that's really wonderful. And the Indianapolis 500 drew 300,000 people to the race this year. And that is remarkable. The big football stadiums hold, 17, 20,000 people. So we have a real interest in sports and entertainment, and being central, we draw from other states for some of our tourist dollars for entertainment and headquarters. Headquarters of the NCAA is in Indianapolis, and headquarters of other groups is right there in the state. There's really headquarters for lots of businesses. Banking and medical and things like that are headquartered, and because of the centrality of the state. So you see here, geography is really about location, and Indiana has a prime location to be a service state for much of the rest of the country. Some people say, well, it's a state to fly over. I used to tease that you would have a road sign right there at the border, stop only in emergencies. I thought that was kind of funny, but Indiana serves that purpose, and we're fine with that. If people want to go through our state, we'll often take their dollars for donuts. Now, this geography of the state, we have to feature hospitality and the diversity that we have, but much of our geography based on self-reliance and just family stuff. We got lots of nice suburbs and good places to raise families. Many parks. We got 24 state parks and one national park. The Indiana Dunes has become a national park, and maybe we'll get another one someday. But Indiana is really wide open for business, particularly technical businesses and advanced businesses, kind of ahead of the step. So if you're locating from the West Coast or whatever, Indiana may be a much more economically viable state to locate in. Property is not that expensive, and there's often tax relief for various companies. But the hospitality in this state is enormous. I used to call on 30 farms a week up in Wisconsin, and there would be just very few words shared. Well, hey, how are you? Or actually, I used to enjoy the Amish. They were actually a little more talkative because I was pretty engaging. Go play horseshoes and help them milk their cows and things like that. So I know how to engage with people. And I didn't have a hat like a John Deere hat that the Amish would wear. But that was a lot of fun. And Amish are really in this state, in the northern part and in the southwestern part, and they give us a state a real tourist flavor, a different culture. The state itself has got some tourist destinations with New Harmony on the Wabash, way at the tip of Indiana. Also Angel Mounds, 1,000-year-old burial archaeological site. New Harmony, Utopian City by Robert Owen, has been very much preserved, and that is a wonderful tourist attraction. Lincoln's boyhood home, where he grew up, and unfortunately lost his mom there to milk fever, they call it. The cows were out eating poisonous toxin vegetation, and it went right into the milk and killed his mother. So his Lincoln's father had to go to Kentucky and get himself a new wife, so they can go on to Springfield and Lincoln could become famous. These are tourist destinations that are kind of small, but they're intimate and they're nice and they're friendly. County fairs are everywhere. State fair is quite an attraction. So people really have a good time in this state. There's many musicians know that this state is halfway between one tour event and another, and we have some pretty good size auditoriums now that we can use, outdoor facilities, and we get some top flight musicians. Even as a kid, I used to see all the Motown musicians. So I tell my youngins that I saw, Fats Domino and Chubby Checker and Little Richard and the Supremes. They say, "What?" Buddy Holly. But that's because I'm a little bit on the old side. Well, I hope you enjoyed a little bit of a tour of Indiana geography. I'm sure we haven't covered everything, and that's why you take a class in this stuff. I taught this for quite a while, but I never taught it with this twang. I never was Rickety Bill at the time, but as age went, I had no other choice but to become who I really was, and that is just a teeny bit rickety these days. So enjoy and spread the word that the geography out there is ready to listen to. Thank you.